It started like any normal morning. Laci Peterson stood in her kitchen, barefoot, one hand resting gently on her pregnant belly. The TV murmured in the background. A soft Christmas program played, quiet, harmless, ordinary. Outside, the neighborhood in Modesto was calm. Lawns trimmed. Cars parked neatly. Nothing looked out of place. But something was. Laci moved slowly, her expression tight. Not pain, just discomfort. 8 months pregnant. Every step heavier than the last. She reached for a glass of water, paused, and stared out the window. Something felt off. Not wrong. Just off. Her dog barked suddenly from outside. She turned her head. "Hey, relax," she whispered, more to herself than the dog. Then silence again. Hours later, the front door was still unlocked. The TV was still on. Her phone, left behind. And Laci? Gone. By evening, panic had already started to spread. Her husband, Scott Peterson, stood in the driveway talking to neighbors. His voice sounded steady. Controlled. Almost too controlled. "I came back. She wasn't here," he said, shaking his head slightly. "I thought maybe she went for a walk." But no one had seen her. Not a single neighbor. Not one person. Police arrived quickly. They stepped into the house and immediately noticed what didn't make sense. No signs of struggle. No forced entry. No broken glass. Everything looked normal. Too normal. One officer glanced at the kitchen counter. Keys, wallet, phone. All still there. People don't just leave those behind. Not willingly. Outside, flashing lights painted the quiet street in red and blue. Neighbors gathered in small groups, whispering. "Pregnant women don't just disappear," one woman muttered. Another shook her head. "Not like this." Scott stood alone for a moment, staring at the ground. His face unreadable. No tears. No panic. Just stillness. That night, the story began to spread. A pregnant woman. Missing without a trace. No evidence. No witnesses. No answers. And one question that refused to go away. How does someone vanish, from their own home, in broad daylight? What no one knew yet was that this wasn't just a missing person case. It was something far darker. And the worst part? The truth wasn't outside the house. It was much closer than anyone thought. By the next morning, the entire neighborhood in Modesto had changed. Police tape stretched across lawns. News vans lined the street. Cameras pointed at one house, the last place Laci Peterson was ever seen. Volunteers began to gather. Dozens at first, then hundreds. Flyers were printed fast. Her face, smiling, calm, pregnant, was everywhere. Missing. 8 months pregnant. Search teams spread out across parks, streets, and empty fields. They called her name. Laci. Nothing. Just wind moving through dry grass. Inside the house, detectives moved slowly, carefully. Every detail mattered now. One officer stood in the living room, scanning everything again. The couch. The cushions. The remote placed neatly beside it. No signs of panic. No signs of a struggle. It didn't fit. In the kitchen, another detective leaned closer to the counter. Keys, wallet, phone. Still untouched. He frowned. "People don't leave without these," he said quietly. Another officer nodded. "Unless they didn't plan on leaving." Outside, Scott Peterson spoke to reporters. His tone was calm, measured. "I just want her home," he said. "That's all that matters." But something about it felt rehearsed. Too smooth. Later that day, police sat him down. Routine questions. Simple. "Walk us through your day." Scott didn't hesitate. "I went fishing," he said. "Fishing. On Christmas Eve." Detectives exchanged a quick glance. "Where?" one asked. "Berkeley Marina," Scott replied. That caught their attention. "That wasn't close. Not a quick trip. Did anyone see you there?" Scott paused. "Not really," he admitted. The room went quiet. Meanwhile, the search intensified. Helicopters scanned open areas. Boats checked nearby water. Still nothing. No trace. But then, something small. A neighbor stepped forward. "I saw the dog," she said. Police turned immediately. "What about the dog?" "It was wandering, alone. I put it back in the yard." "What time?" "Late morning." That changed everything. If the dog was already outside, then Laci had to be gone before that. Detectives went back inside the house. Now they weren't just looking for clues. They were looking for lies. That night, as cameras stayed locked on the house, one detail began to stand out more than anything else. Not what was found, but what wasn't. No struggle. No noise. No witnesses. Just a pregnant woman, who vanished. And a husband whose story was the only one they had. But something about that story didn't sit right. And investigators were about to dig deeper. Much deeper. The story was starting to shift. At first, it was a missing person case. Now, it was something else. Detectives returned to the house in Modesto with one goal: break the timeline. They sat across from Scott Peterson again. Same calm posture. Same steady voice. But this time they pushed harder. "Tell us again," one detective said. "From the beginning." Scott nodded. "I left that morning," he said. "Went fishing. Came back, she was gone." Simple. Too simple. "Fishing on Christmas Eve?" the detective pressed. Scott didn't react. "Yeah. Just needed some time." Then came the detail that stuck. "What were you fishing for?" Scott hesitated. "Just for a second. Sturgeon." The detective wrote it down slowly. Because earlier, he'd said something different. Small inconsistency. But in cases like this, small cracks become big ones. Meanwhile, investigators started digging into his movements. His phone. His receipts. His route. Everything. At Berkeley Marina, officers retraced his steps. The water stretched out endlessly. Cold. Dark. A place where things disappear. Easily. "Convenient spot," one officer muttered. Another didn't respond. He didn't need to. They were thinking the same thing. Back in Modesto, something else surfaced. A phone call. Not to family. Not to police. To another woman. Her name was Amber Fry. And she had no idea Laci even existed. When detectives contacted her, everything changed. "I've been seeing him," she said, confused. "He told me he was single." The room went silent. They showed her a photo. Laci. Smiling. Pregnant. Amber's face dropped. "That's his wife." Then came the detail that flipped the entire case. "He told me he lost his wife," Amber said slowly. "That this would be his first Christmas without her." Detectives didn't speak for a moment. Because that statement didn't just sound suspicious. It sounded like preparation. Back at the house, cameras still rolled. Reporters still speculated. But behind the scenes, the focus had changed. This wasn't just about finding Laci anymore. It was about understanding Scott. His lies. His timing. His secrets. Because now the question wasn't, what happened to her? It was, what did he do? And the deeper they looked, the worse it got. By now the case had exploded. Every major network in the U.S. was covering it. Outside the home in Modesto, reporters stood day and night, waiting for updates that never seemed to come. But behind the cameras, everything was changing. Detectives weren't chasing a missing person anymore. They were building a case. Inside a quiet room, Amber Fry sat across from investigators, her hands slightly trembling. She kept replaying everything in her head. Every conversation. Every moment. "He told me he was alone," she said. "That he didn't have anyone." One detective leaned forward. "Are you willing to help us?" Amber hesitated, then nodded. That decision would change everything. From that moment on, Amber became their inside window into Scott Peterson. Every call, recorded. Every word, analyzed. The first call came sooner than expected. Scott sounded relaxed. Calm. Like nothing had happened. "I'm in Europe," he told her casually. "Celebrating the holidays." Amber's grip tightened on the phone. She looked at the detectives in front of her. They shook their heads slowly. He wasn't in Europe. He was standing just miles away, under heavy media attention, pretending his pregnant wife was missing. Amber swallowed hard. "Wow, that sounds nice," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. Inside, her thoughts were racing. Why would he lie about something so simple? The calls continued. And with each one, the lies grew bigger. Scott talked about the future. Trips they could take. Life they could build together. All while his wife's face was on every TV screen in America. Detectives listened carefully. Not just to what he said, but how he said it. No panic. No urgency. No real concern. One investigator finally said what everyone was thinking. "He's not looking for her." Meanwhile, the physical search intensified. Teams returned again and again to the water near Berkeley Marina. Boats moved slowly across the surface. Divers prepared below. Cold, dark, silent. Something was down there. It wouldn't be easy to find. Back on land, more evidence started stacking up. Scott's timeline had gaps. Unexplained ones. Receipts that didn't fully match his story. Movements that couldn't be confirmed. Then came another detail. Small, but chilling. He had recently purchased a boat. Not long before Laci disappeared. Detectives stared at the report. Did anyone know about this? One asked. No one did. Not friends. Not family. Not even Laci. Why buy a boat and tell no one? The pieces were starting to connect. Slowly. Uncomfortably. At the same time, Scott remained in the spotlight. Standing in front of cameras. Speaking carefully. I just want my wife back, he repeated. But the words felt empty now. Rehearsed. Behind closed doors, investigators were no longer asking if he was involved. They were asking how. Amber's calls became more critical. Each conversation pulled back another layer. Another lie. Another contradiction. In one call, Scott laughed. Actually laughed. While discussing normal, everyday things. As if nothing had happened. A detective leaned back, shaking his head. That's not how someone acts when their wife is missing. Public opinion began to shift. At first, people felt sympathy. Now, they felt something else. Suspicion. Outside the house, whispers spread through the crowd. He knows something. He's hiding it. The tone had changed. And then, pressure started to build. From the media. From the public. From law enforcement. Scott could feel it. Even if he didn't show it. His movements became more cautious. More controlled. But also, more telling. Because the harder someone tries to appear normal, the more unnatural they seem. Weeks passed. Still no sign of Laci. No clear answers. Just growing tension. Until one quiet morning, everything shifted again. A report came in. From near the same waters Scott had visited. San Francisco Bay. Something had been found. At first it wasn't clear what it was. Just remains. Badly decomposed. Unrecognizable. But the location? Too close. Too familiar. Investigators moved quickly. Securing the area. Testing everything. And as more pieces were discovered, the reality began to settle in. This wasn't a search anymore. It was a recovery. Back in Modesto, the news hadn't been released yet. But inside the investigation team, no one was speaking. Because they all knew what this meant. The worst-case scenario was no longer a theory. It was becoming the truth. And the man who stood in front of cameras, as a worried husband, was now at the center of something far darker. The only question left was, could they prove it?